think we've got about 20 minutes for discussion with these guys. Just a couple of ground rules on the discussion. Can you we've been really good at it today, and I think everyone knows the format now. So can you wait for the microphone to get to you? And when the microphone does get to you, it'd be really good if you could let us know who you are and who you work for before you ask the question. As is traditional, I think I might take chair's prerogative and throw the first question across all of the panel. I'll pass the microphone across and you can all have a go at answering. Bronwyn obviously gets more time to think about this. So I'm just interested in your thoughts as to what's been instrumental in improving the relationship between flood risk managers, planners, local government and developers. What's driving that and what's really making it happen? Sorry, Dan. So can you keep it? Just yeah. Formulate, yeah. Do you want me to speak it slow? Yeah, so what's been instrumental in improving the relationship between flood risk managers, planners, local government and developers?
Not sure how to answer that question. I think it's just individuals, isn't it? We're all individuals, we all have our different styles, but fundamentally we all need to recognize, what needs to be delivered. And again, things are probably can differ. The specifics differ per individual project at different time scales and different times in the project life cycle. So I don't know. It's a very hard one to answer because you can't really police it or put a policy to define it. Or I don't know. Maybe some others have.
I think the individuals are important, and it is those personal relationships. Certainly in terms of the Gateshead example, we've got Peter, who's a very sort of strong voice and sort of pushing for SuDS and integrating SuDS into development, but not necessarily just sort of purely academic. It is sort of real world stuff, and ultimately comes up with sort of real world solutions. There's not only Peter from the Gateshead side, but we also have an ecologist who's very sort of proactive, and ultimately I think it's that proactivity that feeds onto the planners. So we're likely now to be far more aware of issues around SuDS and ecology and biodiversity. I think that's just basically because of the individuals within the authority who are really pushing that message.
I also think it's down to the developer too. With our example at Follingsby, we had a developer who's very keen to sort of integrate high quality green infrastructure into that development. I think it helped that it was very high profile development, who's working with sort of big budgets, so there was that leeway to maybe spend a bit more on the green space too. But he was very instrumental in bringing us all together, and all the sort of other partnerships, such as the sort of catchment partnership as well. So that played a big part.
Yeah, I agree. I think as a developer we have a big place to play in this by trying to look at the bigger picture sometimes, not just numbers, working with the various teams that we've got at our disposal, and just trying to realise that by putting a bit more in up front, maybe we get a lot more out at the end.
I think it's actually experience. If you think that we've been doing this role now for 4 years, and I wouldn't say we've become settled in what we're doing, but for most part, the teams that are in place in the lead local flood authorities, the consultants and the developers, we've all learnt what the process is. So I think that experience has been really important for all of us. The other part is having opportunities to engage and learn and network and share information. So at Kent, we provide a developer seminar on an annual basis. We do that each year. This year, unfortunately, was a bit full-packed, 2 hours, and it was us telling them information, but the idea is that it actually gives us an opportunity to all talk together as a community, which has been, I think, very beneficial for us. We also usually hold annually a local planning authority workshop where we try and share experience with our LPA membership community. So it's just about sharing and networking and making sure everyone's sort of all on the same page.
Well, I'll throw questions over to the floor now. I've stolen the first one. Graham?
Graham First, Chair of the susdrain PSG. I think it's a question for Redrow, this one. It's so rare we have a developer, and thanks for being with us. Hope we have a lot more in the future. You talked about a net gain on biodiversity. I'd like your comments on that as to whether you feel that has been achieved on this site. But I'm also interested in amenity, and whether you felt that the property sales, there was a premium actually on the properties that had amenity benefit from proximity to the SuDS features, compared, for instance, with other sites where you've had traditional drainage. Is there any? Do you have any feeling for that, or any numbers?
I don't have any numbers, but I can say it's a very good selling site. It's a very good selling site, so it's one of the more consistent selling sites. And I'd like to say that's down to the amenity areas that we put in, but I don't have any figures to say exactly whether that was or not. With regards to net gains, I'll be honest, I don't think we did get net gains on this one. I think it was maybe a bit early in the process. But I do feel going forward that the new developments that are coming through that we're discussing, that we will achieve that target. There are workshops being rolled out by Redrow with the net gains policy. So we're all learning as we're going ahead now. But we do feel moving forward, we will be in a good place. But on this one, time will tell.
Anthony.
Anthony McCloy Consulting. There's just a quick one for the panel on, we've talked about integration of SuDS throughout the site, and part of that would be source control. A lot of the pictures we've seen, there's varying degrees in terms of collection of pipe and collection through the site to end-of-line basins and ponds. Is there any appetite to see further encouragement of full integration and source control throughout the site? And just to throw a real fly in the ointment, do we see any benefits or drawbacks with the imminent search for adoption 8 and how that might influence the whole proceedings in terms of policy? Easy one.
Bronwyn's put her hand up.
I was supposed to talk about this in the presentation and I didn't, because Paul had sort of gave me the flag to say main thing that we're not delivering, and source control in actual fact is one we have extreme difficulty in seeing being included. Often it's because of the adoption difficulties if they're going for adoption by the sewage undertaker. The other part of it I actually think is a developer issue. We don't see small, we only have one scheme in Kent that's got downspout disconnection and control by swales, and we adopted it. So I think that there is a very clear problem with who is going to maintain it, whose responsibility it is, where does it sit within the curtilage, and that's one thing I think I'm very interested to follow up with Wales, because if they've seen it within curtilage on small site, that's something that we need to bring forward into England, because I don't see us doing more within Kent unless we're moving on it and adopting them.
I don't think I can add anything more to what you've said, really. Is the adoption of SuDS is key. If we can get a clear view of where we can go in the future, whether it's going to be adopted by the Highway Authority or local authority or drainage authority, if we can get a clear vision of to when that's going to happen and when we can do it, then I think that will help us in developing our sites.
I would agree. Source control is still possibly the hardest area to achieve. We're trying to sort of test the waters. For instance, our case study on Innovation Village, the highways runoff was going over a flush curb into permeable paving that actually formed driveways within the curtilage of properties. So we're quite lucky to persuade the Highways Authority to actually let us do that in that case. It took a lot of paperwork and meetings to actually achieve that. Whether they'll be happy with us doing that on another site, we don't know yet, but it'll be interesting to see how that progresses.
I think I saw John. I think John put his hand up. I think, yeah, John.
I just wanted to add an easy question, I think. Sorry, Bronwyn. The one people nobody's really talks about, although I did note in Gateshead you did mention them, councillors. Ultimately, the decision on development isn't made by the planner, it's not made by the LLFA, it's actually made at a committee. I just wondered to what degree you think councillors are starting to understand the premise around natural surface water management, the provision of SuDS, and actually the integration of SuDS into green space?
Very good question, John. I was watching Parks and Recreation last night and thinking about this exact issue. I shall ask Phil, can you give us a thought?
This is actually a really difficult area for us. I think some of it's around the perception, as Bron was mentioned, some of it's around safety of children, the fact that there's a perception that you could have sort of water pooling in developments that will lead to unattractive areas, whereas really what we're trying to do is the exact opposite. And there is also the fear around flood risk, and Peter mentioned in his presentation we had a scheme recently that was a greenbelt scheme. It had a policy requirement to better greenfield rates, and there was a basin, etc. So ultimately, it would actually reduce the risk of flooding in a settlement elsewhere. But I think the members could see on the drawing there was an area of blue, and the fear is that would overtop and then just lead to all sorts of disaster further down the way. Certainly, all the professional advice we were offering, and Peter was there as well, and was able to sort of offer his professional opinion. But it's a very, very tough one for us to sell.
So within a couple of our authorities, we actually, I would say, have some planning committees which are not necessarily switched on, but very engaged with us. We've got one authority, it's Tunbridge Wells, which itself has had flooding, is really looking for sustainable drainage retrofits, is looking for solutions. They have one community where they want to put an additional 3,000 units, which has flooding in its little service centre area, and they've entered into a very forward thinking on their stage 2 of their SFRA. So they're looking at flood compensation, they're looking at how they can relieve the service area. And they, I wouldn't say protective, but when they've had very contentious planning committees, and it could say that I'm put on the spot because I'm defending what the consultant has submitted, they are seeking the questions and responding to the community. So I'd say in a couple of instances we've had very, very good examples of councillors who are engaged. On the other hand, as you say, I think there are some who are not and are more interested in other matters and aren't necessarily on board, but they may not be communities who have the same flood risk potential as others.
Michael at the back there, please. Thanks, Paul.
It's just building on another question a little bit. I mean, obviously, stakeholders in the process that we've not really discussed are residents so much. I'm just wondering to what extent with the developments that we're looking at here, were residents, one, aware of what was going on around them, and two, engaged with it? I mean, obviously we've got a lovely photo just there behind us of some monkey bars and a basin, but I can't actually see anybody in the picture. So I'm just wondering, just talk to me about the engagement level.
Yeah, good question, Michael. I was thinking the exact same thing. I think, Dan, you alluded to local sites developed by local requirements. So can I get you to maybe answer that first? Sorry, Dan.
No, that's fine. So as part of the planning process to deliver this particular scheme in Ebbsfleet, I think it was a requirement to engage with public consultation events, statutory events, to engage the local populace. And as well as we had, I think, the traffic steering group meeting also to, this is not drainage related, but the transport and parking issues also to address as the developer gets built out. So there are forums for, residents both within the locality and on the site itself to contribute to how the development gets panned out. Interestingly, that's what informed, the slides, the two slides I mentioned of the same basin. that's what actually involved changing the landscaping scheme on that particular basin because of responsive residents' should I say concerns or comments, or how to address them. But again, is having that balance of trying to achieve what you set out to deliver in terms of SuDS, meeting the 4 requirements or pillars. But ultimately, it needs to be fit for purpose. It needs to meet the aspirations of people that would actually use it, not necessarily as as designers what we want to promote, but what actually gets used by people. So I'm not sure if I answered your question around a round way, but
maybe not on this site, but on other sites we do have community interaction days where they come in. We've had schools come in. We've got a site in Staplehurst where we've got a SuDS feature to the front of the site, and we've actually brought in the local schools, brought them in. We brought the is it the Bumblebee Society for Protection? I can't remember what the name is, but they've been down there. We've had days, so the interaction with the community is there for these things. That was a very quiet day, that's all I can say. It was
I think with the time lag of applications coming through to sort of selling the houses on our sort of big green belt sites, we haven't had that many big SuDS schemes that have really got that far yet. On the big sites, though, the developers certainly do consult with all the local residents, existing residents. No major concerns have particularly been raised yet, apart from the site that we've talked about in terms of concerns in advance of the development actually happening in terms of flood risks. So on some sites, we're including conditions to ensure that there's a sort of home buyers information pack. I'm not aware if any have actually got that far yet, though, but yeah, that's in the pipeline. From the sort of local councillors' perspective, we also sort of hold training days to sort of get that buy-in to SuDS as well. But I think that's something that has to be repeated almost on a yearly basis to keep everyone up to speed.
I was just going to add to that, in addition to things like putting things in the information packs for the residents, one of the things we discussed when we did the site visit with Bromway's team is whether we need to put things like information boards by the side of each feature to just explain what the feature is meant to deliver, what the benefits are, so that when people see loads of planting within the basin, they know it's there to enhance biodiversity, rather than actually something to impede them actually getting to the space to actually have a picnic in the closer to the watercourse, as it were. So I think that's something maybe in the emerging design guide that you mentioned is whether we can have some kind of information in there that enables people to put these things, in developments.
Martin, could I just ask you a question while Dan's got the microphone? You showed the two different basins, and there was a perception of the public that the one without the biodiversity value and just the neatly mown grass was better. Did they say why? Was it because it looked neater and you were able to get more access, or was there anything else about it in terms of losing children and stuff like that? What's the driver?
Again, I'm not sure the actual details of what drove it, but what I understood it was to be that you've got they look at it as a big open space, a big green space, but it might be worth flicking through the presentation to the actual slide. So when you look at the scheme, that whole space looks very nice, but people feel they can't get into it to play, kickabout football or something. So some people might think it's a waste of space, whereas others might think, yes, it's a nice biodiverse area. But how do you balance the two? Which is, again, what we're talking about. Do we probably start creating zones of the more biodiverse planting and then areas of mown grass? But then again, we still have to have that balance so that and actually display. We're talking about actually put display boards and say, okay, this is why we're doing what we're doing. Hopefully that would then with better education to the residents and everyone, then have a better acceptance of what the scheme is meant to deliver in the first place. It's hard to do that in an information pack sat in someone's house when you're walking the scheme and you can't actually tell which basin you're actually at.
It was actually about access. I think that they felt that they wanted there's this question about physical open space, and though we all look at the grass and we go, okay, that's giving benefit, there was a need, or because I'm not being negative about housing units at Red Row, at Ebbsfleet Green, but they don't necessarily have large gardens. They don't have that large amount of space for a kid to run around in. And I think that they were looking, or the residents were looking at this very lengthy, large area of green space, and they didn't see something where the kids could run around in, even though we all know, well, when we went to site, we talked about maybe cutting half of the basin back, providing, meadow runs through it and that sort of thing. So it is a bit sad, actually, that they've ended up cutting all of it. Because we actually had some grand thoughts about what we could do on the maintenance side. But I think it is about that perception of, can you go into that area? And that's, I think the board information boards is about the best way, because even though information packs go to homeowners, I've always wondered whether, when there's a change in property ownership, whether those packs go on. I don't know whether that information continues.
I think this is an example where you need sort of strong concepts for your drainage design, the landscape design and the ecology all going as a thread right through from early days of the development. We've got a similar scheme where this basin was designed, but we were almost at planning conditions stage, and the designers still hadn't really worked out what the use was for that basin, whether it was going to be an amenity space or biodiversity, and there wasn't that initial thread of thought right from the beginning of the process. It was left too late.
We've obviously heard about examples from the UK today, but where are we in terms of what's going on in the rest of Europe or even the world? Are we ahead or behind? Or
I'm going to pass that one to Bronwyn.
When I arrived here in 2003, we were way behind, like blocks and miles behind. But my perception, okay, I'm not up like Paul probably in what's happening internationally. I keep my eye on generally what's going on. There's been more movement in the States on low impact development. They're coming out with a lot more streetscape design, retrofitting within highways, but they have a different institutional arrangement. They have municipal utilities. They don't have the same adoption issues that we have. So if you're sitting in Seattle, you've got something happening in the street, that's all part of the municipality. There's no question about who looks after it. And if they have a general requirement, like if you're in Chesapeake, you've got water quality requirements. So there's a really big push to have LID happening in all development because they've got to meet water quality goals. So they have been doing things of late. Australia has been very, very active. But I don't necessarily see as much change. I'd go back on holidays. I'm a bit of a sad person. I go and look at developments when I'm on holidays. I go look at swales and see what's going on. And you see bits and pieces, but we're on par with them in what we're doing. But again, they have different council arrangements and they have different adoption outcomes. So I think we have a particular challenge with the way our water is split up between highways, sewage undertakers, and property owners. I think it's a real problem for us.
Okay, I'm going to throw one more question in. I'm interested across all of you, really quick fire answer on this one. So I'm interested in what you see the future of SuDS is going to be in the country, and perhaps what needs to happen to make that happen.
I think adoption, who adopts what, is probably what I think is going to be the main driver. Because we saw also adoption 8 might really change the whole landscape in terms of, introducing source control or maintaining runoff drainage off the highway. Who's going to maintain it all and who's going to pay for all those? Developers would have to probably pay a bit more, but if it enhances the development, I don't see that being a problem. But ultimately, I think everyone has the same idea in terms of who adopts what.
I think it's perhaps a very clear sort of policy steer. We just talked about the two-tier authorities, and I have experience of working in two-tier authorities as well, where you can have two authorities next door to each other that just have a very different approach, and that just can't be right.
think source control's critical. Some of the developments with sort of smart technology and rainwater harvesting are encouraging, and in a way that may put the responsibility onto the house owner for sort of maintaining their own water supplies and things. So that's really where we need to control the water, particularly with sort of difficulties in obtaining the amount of space given high land values.
From a personal point of view, probably bridging that gap between a developer's drivers, my own numbers, and actually creating the amenity space and the SuDS and bringing it into a collective development where everything fits and all of the criteria are met.
I'm very positive because I think what we're talking about will be, if you think about where the government wants to go with the 25-year plan, where they're looking at net environmental gain, I think things are being brought together. It might not be next year, it might not be the year after. I think we're doing a good job now. Well, okay, we've got some bad things happening, but I think we're going to get to a good place. So I think it's a very positive outlook for us. We've just got to keep plugging away.
Excellent. Thank you very much. So I'm going to bring today to a close. I think we've seen some really excellent presentations today and some real proof that we are going in the right direction. I think for a long time, perhaps the SuDS community felt like we were sailing into a strong headwind and maybe not getting anywhere. And I certainly think over the last couple of years, there's been real progress. And the fact we've got a developer here today speaking positively about SuDS says perhaps more than any of the other presentations. But there's a definite seed of change and a definite momentum, and that can only be a good thing. And I think we can see there's a lot of good work that's taken place and continues to take place, but we're not there yet. So as a SuDS community, I don't think we can give up pushing and trying to take this forward. I think what we've really has stood out from all the presentations today is that strong policy, buy-in right through the stakeholder chain and collaboration in that stakeholder chain really does make a difference in terms of delivering SuDS. If we haven't got everybody bought into the process, right from the future residents, the contractors, the LLFAs, everybody involved in that process, then really we're really not going to deliver SuDS in the way that SuDS should be delivered. So I think that's the central takeaway really from today. I'd like to ask you all to thank our speakers in the usual way.